Alright, so the Eagles will officially play the Los Angeles Rams in the Divisional Round, which has left a bit of mixed reactions. However, why are the Birds looking at the best case scenario moving forward and even the potential of hosting the NFC Championship game? Meanwhile, there's a couple injury updates from both teams, plus why Nakobe Dean's recovery might be unfortunately longer than you think, and it looks like Vic Fangio just revealed his plan for that replacement. FYI, it's Axeman time. Although there is one linebacker the Eagles brought back and it's kind of making people lose their minds. So let's talk about that and all the latest news around Philly. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? So I honestly think the Eagles just got the best possible playoff path they could have. And the stage is set. The Birds will be hosting the LA Rams in the Divisional Round Sunday. Thanks to, of course, the Washington Commies winning by the way of the doink over the Bucks, and Sam Darnold's ghost from the time he was with the Jets coming back, resulting in him having the worst drop-back efficiency in the first half out of all quarterbacks in this century. I'm not even kidding. He graded out as 563 out of 563 while taking 9 sacks. And quite literally getting body slammed from the top rope by the Rams. Like, give Kobe Turner, Byron Young, and the rest of that young D-line some credit. However, despite Darnold's solid play most of the season, it's fair to say he cost both him and his agent a good bit of money after that performance.
Yeah, listen, we f***ed up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's obvious if it wasn't already. Granted, it might have actually been the whole Dan Campbell jinx from the clip right after Detroit beat Minnesota in Week 18.
Good job, Greg. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Might see him in 2 weeks.
I mean, now the only place that those two could get together along the same timeline is Cancun. Although as an 8.5-point favorite over Washington, it seems pretty unlikely that the Lions lose. Plus, add on to it the whole disrespect that the Commies threw at Detroit offensive coordinator Ben Johnson last year, and I'd expect him to be in his bag. By the way, in case you're not getting that reference, Johnson interviewed for the head coaching job for Washington at the end of last season. However, when he pulled his name out of consideration, then the Washington front office reportedly said he was a poor interviewer and lacked the personality of a leader head coach, so wasn't going to get the job anyway.
I am no good before 11 a.m.
To be fair, Johnson also then returned fire, saying he was turned off by Washington and that they're ultimately just basketball guys who are a little too confident in their football opinions.
That's all I needed. That's all I needed for him to do that, and it became personal with me.
Sounds like that wasn't going to work out for either side, but you can bet there's going to be bulletin board material for both sides. Now, where this comes into play for the Eagles is that if the Commies pull off the upset and the Birds beat LA, then Philly would host the NFC Championship game. And I'm just going to put this good energy out there right now. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, because if the Eagles end up hosting the NFC Championship game, I'm going to give away 2 tickets to 1 random subscriber. Obviously, make sure your notifications are turned on as well so you don't miss the official announcement for if and when that happens. Okay, serious question. I'm trying to get a pulse check. How confident are you guys feeling about the Rams this coming week? I say that after the LA blowout of Minnesota, because judging by the votes, it appears the vast majority of Eagles fans got what they wanted, which on one hand makes sense when you think about the last matchup in LA, where the Birds dominated 37-20, and really more like 37-14 with the Rams' garbage time touchdown. Regardless, the blowout was a huge part due to Saquon Barkley's performance of 255 yards on a 9.8 yards per carry average and 2 touchdowns. Heck, even with Chris Shula getting his defense to stack the box with 8 or more guys 35% of the time, Saquon still averaged 12.7 yards per carry in those instances. Oh yeah, and then a refresher for you on Jalen, but he had one of his best games of the season throwing over the middle of the field, completing 10 for 11 passes for 97 yards between the numbers. By the way, in case you don't recall, that was a game also that the Eagles did not have DeVonta Smith playing in that one, whereas the main loss for LA was right tackle Rob Havenstein. Now, this week, the main injuries to look out for was Sean McVay's squad or tight end Tyler Higbee, who suffered a chest injury and ended up having to be hospitalized. Thankfully, it sounds like he's in a stable condition, though, and it seems like he'll be returning to the field with him saying it's very likely he'll make the matchup. And then there's also starting cornerback Akhello Witherspoon, who had to leave with a thigh injury and is starting off the week resting. So certainly something to monitor and keep an eye on. Of course, the good news for Philly is that A.J. Brown said Sunday that he thinks he's turned a corner with the knee injury he's been dealing with and believes that won't hold him back as much as it has. I will say, that does make me curious about how much the knee injury's been affecting him. After all, a fully healthy A.J. Brown probably ends up getting to that ball from Jalen on the fake brotherly shove. Regardless, the biggest win to come from Sunday's game is that Saquon Barkley is healthy and so is the O-line. Because ever since the Eagles handed LA that embarrassing home loss, it seemed to wake up their defense. In particular, the D-line and the run-stopping game, as the unit has helped the Rams win 6 straight games with the starters.
Ultimately, it's always about the players bringing it to life and having a real understanding of what we were trying to get done, what was the intent. They have really played excellent football as of late. They're peaking at the right time. They're not showing any of that youth that you would think, as you play your 18th game.
Maybe they are, but while they haven't allowed a running back to get over 70 yards in the last 6 games, It's one thing to shut down the likes of James Cook or Breece Hall or Aaron Jones, and another thing entirely with it being Saquon behind an O-line that's motivated from a performance that they'd call needs to be better.
But this is playoff football. The stakes are much higher. And, I think that's just the reality of ball. Sometimes it just comes down to the team that executes at a higher rate.
The idea of an Eagles O-line motivated to prove it against the Rams should give you a ton of confidence. Plus, let's not forget that the weather forecast is calling for a freezing cold game with a decent chance for rain or snow. And also, if you buy into this sort of thing, Nick Sirianni is 25-5 straight up when the Birds are 5.5-point favorites or better, which is right where they are. Although sure, I've seen some comments of people a little bit leery to play Matthew Stafford with some momentum. But honestly, the Rams offense ranks just 20th in points per game. In fact, over the last 4 games with starters, they've only averaged 18 points. And even though they haven't faced each other much over the last several years, it's not a stretch to say Vic Fangio's defenses have had McVay's number. So yeah, Fangio will be prepared.
These guys are a very game plan specific team. They're going to have a mode of operation of the way they want to attack you, and we got to be ready for that.
Look, what this comes down to for me, at least on the defensive side, is how does the defense adjust without Nakobe Dean? Because we already know it's official that Zack Baun will be the one wearing the green dot, and Fangio even said he doesn't anticipate that'll limit the defense in any way. However, where the uncertainty is within the production you're giving up from Dean. So will they turn to Jeremiah Trotter Jr. or Oren Burks as the backup?
We'll call it as we see fit.
What has Trot shown you as a young kid?
Trot? Yeah, I think Trot's got a good future, and that future may be now. He's got good instincts, really likes the game. He's smart. He's got a lot of good qualities.
That is about as clear as you're going to get it from the DC. After all, he's not going to blow smoke for no reason. And like Anthony DeBona pointed out, Oren Burks has 29 tackles, but 7 missed tackles. Plus, he's allowed 15 catches on 16 targets for 102 yards. Meanwhile, in a smaller sample size, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. has 14 tackles and 2 missed tackles, yet just 6 receptions on 8 targets allowed for only 29 yards. Think about it, this makes sense in the short term as well as in the long term, because we definitely wish Nakobe a speedy recovery, although patellar tendon rehabs can be difficult. And with the expected timeline being 9 to 10 months, it's possible that you'd have to have someone in there next to Baun to start the season anyway. So I say go with the Rook.
Now, the problem with this is when you're doing an ACL reconstruction, you're coming back from an ACL, you want to fire the squad as soon as possible. With a patellar tendon repair, it's the opposite. You do not want to fire it as soon as possible, and that has a tendency to slow down the recovery. Now, depending on who you ask, the data shows you can come back in 6 months, but sometimes it's closer to 12 months. Now, I do expect him to have surgery within this next week, and assuming there's no other injuries in the knee, I expect him to start the season on the PUP list. Now, the problem with these is they are frustrating injuries. They're very slow injuries, and they're hard to be explosive, which is not what you want to see with a guy like this. Now, let me give you some examples of other guys that have come back from this. One that you Eagles fans may remember is Brandon Graham. There's also Lucas Niang, J.C. Jackson, and Gerard Mayo, the former Patriots head coach and player. With that being said, the data seems to show that if he does come back next season in 2025, he's probably not going to be 100% post-surgery ideal stats until probably 2 to 3 years after this. It's kind of a big deal. So these are bad injuries. It's unfortunate injury, very frustrating injury, significant surgery. Although Brandon Graham, just for comparison, he also had a torn ACL, so he had a little bit extra. But in general, these are frustrating injuries.
Shout out to Dr. Jesse Morse for the breakdown there. Of course, you never know exactly how long something might take, but for those curious, with him mentioning BG, it technically took BG almost a year to get back, as he suffered the injury December of 2010, but didn't return to the field until November of 2011, where BG only played 3 games. And realistically, it wasn't until the following season that he really got back closer to full strength. So given that, like I said, my preference is to get Trot in there and see what he can do. Granted, even if they do that, it doesn't have to be a ton of snaps, since in case you don't recall, the Eagles played the most dime package they did all season in the earlier matchup against the Rams. I mean, we all know the Swiss Army knife that Cooper DeJean is, but here's the thing. Worst case scenario, you just walk him up to the line, you stay in dime package, use him as that hybrid linebacker, the versatility that he can be against the run, it could be perfectly fine. I don't know, maybe that's crazy, but the wisdom of Fangio is that he's already got the guys prepared to play with Baun. Remember, they played in the Dallas game when Nakobe was out, and they've gotten more reps together in practice.
It's an adjustment. They haven't had the amount of reps together that Zack and Nakobe did. So, yeah, it's an adjustment. But we practiced them that way. I kind of have a little rule not to put two backup linebackers in practice together because that's not how it's going to happen in a game. So they've been out there together in practice.
Once again, I don't want to get overconfident, but we've seen more than enough reps from Trot to know that he can definitely make plays. But the part where this gets kind of hilarious and somewhat interesting is seeing that the Eagles officially signed Nicholas Morrow to the practice squad per Mike Garafolo.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
It's funny, but that's just about the same responses from so many Eagles fans on Twitter. Although I can relate to some of the takes, like he reminds people of the worst defense in the league, or he does nothing well, and if he has to see the field, the Eagles are effed. And even he just brings negative vibes. By the way, in case you weren't up to date, Morrow had been on the Buffalo Bills, but ended up getting waived earlier this month. Of course, to the notion of not seeing him on the defense, I get it. Morrow was not good. But there's really nothing to worry about there. Think about it. The only reason he's been brought in is due to his special teams experience and familiarity with Michael Clay, which is actually an area the Birds were good at last season. I mean, we can debate in the chat, so yes, leave your comments, let me know your thoughts on this, but ultimately, I think it's a decent signing here. Honestly, look, it's a short-term rental. You're not keeping him for a long time. It won't hurt you in terms of the special teams. So that's why I'll say I think the present and future are bright. Anyway, on the topic of that future, the gift that keeps on giving are the Dallas Cowboys, as they officially ended up moving on from Mike McCarthy. Now, first off, that might actually be a good thing for their franchise, except when you think about the fact that Jerry Jones allowed an entire week to go by of head coaching interviews before deciding to move on, and miss out on a potential interview with Mike Vrabel, as well as who knows how many others. It just speaks to the depth of how unserious this franchise is. Of course, as I say that, in terms of actual candidates, it looks like Deion Sanders is the favorite to land the gig, followed closely by Kellen Moore. Yet when asked about that notion, Kellen played it coy.
I mean, obviously I've spent a lot of time there, 8 years there, and so obviously have plenty of relationships about that place. And so, I love it here. I've had so much fun here. It's been a really fun process, and we're in a really special situation right now, getting the chance to play this Sunday, have a chance to make a run at this thing, and that's really all you worry about. Everything else is what it is, and we'll see where it takes you.
All right, don't be surprised if we get a report soon saying that Kellen Moore's got an interview request from Dallas. Remember, if the Eagles make the Super Bowl or certainly win it, then it would take a miracle to keep Kellen in Philly. Like at that point, he probably gets his pick of where he wants to go with the remaining gigs. Again, that's just the nature of this thing. It's not a surprise to us, but I mean, come on, who wouldn't trade off a Super Bowl for losing your OC? Finally, I did want to mention the Eagles did a little more shuffling on the offense, adding wide receiver Paris Campbell to the active roster, as well as wide receiver Elijah Cooks to the practice squad, while releasing wide receiver Joseph Ngata and placing Nakobe Dean on the IR. I mean, I don't think there's really any major implications on there, but we'll keep an eye out on the injury report over the next few days to be sure. Hey, real quickly, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button because we're closing in on 100,000 subs. Turn those notifications on because I got some crazy stuff planned in the future. This has been the Philly Special.